Welcome to the Gathering of Tribes weekly discussion of the Come Follow Me lessons. I'm Chuck Kay, and I'm here with Rachel Krause. We're happy to have you join us as we discuss the Doctrine and Covenants with faithful members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This week, we have invited Brother Ramses Stewart Johnson to join the conversation.
Ramses Stewart Johnson is from Arlington, Texas. He studied at BYU Provo and received his associate's degree in computer information systems from DeVry University. In 2014, he founded the North Texas Genesis Group, located in Arlington, as a support group for Black members of the LDS Church. Holding their first meeting in August of that year, he served as president for 7 years. In 2019, Ramses and wife Anna D. moved their family to Utah, where they currently reside in Santaquin. Whether it was with his mother Sabra or his aunt Thelma, he was in the kitchen wanting to know how something was made. Spending 10 plus years in the restaurant industry, an excellent chef by chosen profession, in 2021, Ramses opened Papa Stew's Kitchen, a premier catering company. A father of two young children and five adult children, and grandfather of five, Ramses divides his time between caring for his family and volunteering in the community in multiple capacities. He currently serves as the group lead for Semahadithi Foundation's Buffalo Soldiers Working Group, expert assistant to the Brigham Young Racial Reconciliation Organization, and president of Black Lives Bless. In addition, he accepted an invitation from the Santaquin of mayor to sit on the city's community service board. Welcome, Ramses. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love for you to tell us just a little bit more about yourself. Give us another maybe brief introduction and tell us a little bit more about you.
No, I'm teasing. I think you did really good. That sounds great. And no, a little bit more. I'm really passionate about sports. That's probably the only time that you can not hear me say I'm just chilling. Usually I'm pretty low key and I stay just right there in the middle. But when it comes to sports, that's when you see me yelling at the TV, I have a throw pillow so I don't break my phone again. Yeah, stuff like
Who,
that.
who are your teams?
Professional, it is Cleveland Browns, Dallas Cowboys, college, cheer for BYU, Ohio State, North Carolina, and University of Tennessee. So
Awesome. Thank you. We really appreciate that.
thank you for having me. It's a privilege and an honor.
Yeah, so this is going to be a lot of fun, I think. And so, kind of to preface a little bit just about us and the podcast too. This has been a work of the heart and desire to reach out to those people who maybe sort of feel a little bit divided from the church. With us in the Native American uh, areas, I think a lot of times Native or Indigenous people don't really know how they're connected to their church, although they're very, very connected through the Book of Mormon. But
Very,
but
very.
still, as far as ceremonially and historically and um, religiously, and sometimes they don't know how that fits or how they fit in. I'm sure it's the same in communities of color. There's a lot of things that have happened over the years, and we'll get into those things. But just to be fair with everything, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to discuss some of this whole lesson, which is called "We Believe," and I think that's an excellent title because there's a lot of stuff that can, especially for people like us, may push us off the course a little bit. Think, I'm not sure about all of this, and so this "We Believe" is kind of a good title. So the section and lesson we're studying is Articles of Faith and Official Declarations 1 and 2. And these are added to the Doctrine and Covenants as uh, additional information. Basically, the Doctrine and Covenants ended at section 133, and so that these were added later on. to amend some things and to give some other direction and information for the church. And so in the introduction here, it talks about uh, the the things that we're going to go over here. It says talking about the official declarations 1 and 2, and this is from the introduction. Announced this kind of revelation. One led to the end of plural marriage, and the other made the blessing of the priesthood available to all people, to people of all races. And so, in this, the second, I'll just read the second paragraph. It says, "But eternal truth doesn't change through our understanding, though our understanding of it does. And sometimes revelation casts additional light on truth. The articles of faith serve this clarifying purpose. The church is solidly founded on eternal truth, yet can grow and change according to the Lord's will, suiting his mercies according to the conditions of the children of men." And so I find that really interesting. And I'll give a personal anecdote. Hopefully, you won't take any offense to this, uh, Ramesses, but here was myself, a fairly recently returned missionary in the early 70s, and so the changes. This Declaration 2 happened in 1978, I believe, and so
Right.
I'm sitting in a meeting with some other brethren, and I. An older brother who I often sat by. He was very wise and funny, and so we're sitting there. And so through the years, there was been a number of changes in that area. One of them simply was they went to a two-piece garment. It used to be one piece; you had to climb in, and and then also used to have not block meetings like we do now. We had meetings that lasted all day long. So even primary and sometimes Relief Society were on different days than Sunday, and so we had priesthood Sunday school and sacrament meeting on Sundays. And many times priesthood was first thing in the morning, and then there was Sunday school, and you came in the afternoon for sacrament meeting. And so we're sitting in this meeting, and he just leans over to me very casually and he says, "Who would have thought that we would be sitting here at 2 o'clock in priesthood meeting in our two-piece garments next to a black elder?" So he says, this is something that the church constantly changes. We're seeing things that's dynamic. So I thought that was a very kind of humorous but yet profound statement that, yeah, it's those things that sometimes we don't even really think about. So um, I just wrote myself a note that says God commands and God rescinds to assure his children are served as he has planned. My ways are not your ways. And so that thought ran through my mind, that he's got a plan. And it seems like in some of this, it's almost, I'm going to let you use your agency to figure out what you're going to do next. And so how do you feel about that, Ramses? Is this something that is an obstacle or an enlightenment, you think? All of this, including the articles of faith.
It's funny because I'm old enough to remember when we used to do Sunday school, priesthood, and then sacrament.
Right.
And I remember when it changed because so many people would be like, okay, I've been at church for 2 hours, and they wouldn't be at sacrament, not realizing sacrament was the most important meeting. And that's why it was made first. To your question, I have not ever seen it as a stumbling block. When we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I shared, I didn't go into detail, and we don't really have time to go into detail, but when I found out that Black men couldn't hold the priesthood, I wasn't even active. I was dating someone whose father was a Pentecostal minister who gave me a bunch of anti-Mormon literature, and it was that's where it came from. And I went and inquired of people that I knew from my youth, and the majority of the answers was, we just don't know, but it's changed. And I wasn't upset. It just didn't sit well with me. And the beautiful part about these three topics in general all come because there was a situation. Articles of faith come because Joseph wants to pin what is it that members of their church actually believe. What's our foundation? We have the Book of Mormon. We are Christians. We believe in Jesus Christ. But what is it that we really believe? We get the Articles of Faith. We have the U.S. government wanting to annihilate and destroy the church and destroy temples because we practice polygamy. President Woodruff gets revelation about Official Declaration number 1. Mm-hmm. And essentially the same thing happens with President Kimball with Official Declaration number 2. For me, what it does show is kind of what you alluded to about the ongoing revelation. But how do we receive revelation? Sometimes we could just be sitting and poof, we get it. And we're like, oh, hey, this time we got to go do this. But usually it's because something has come up that has caused a stir within us, that we sit, we pray, we ponder, we think, we still live our lives, but it's at the core of everything that we're thinking. And then the Lord answers that question. And I think that is the one thing that everyone should take away from these three, is that they didn't come because Spencer W. Kimball said, I wonder if black men can have the priesthood and black people can go to the temple. No, when you study it, he spent days, months, hours, weeks, years trying to get an answer.
Yeah.
We don't, and I think that's where we miss. So for me, no, it's not. It's a reminder that the Lord loves us. And as much as we want to dismiss it, he's in the details. And we have to remember he is in the details.
I appreciate that thought process, especially what you were saying about, these revelations being an answer to a question, because I mean, that's how the restoration of the gospel began. Joseph Smith having a question and praying about it, right? It wasn't like one day, Joseph was just going about his business and a bolt of lightning or, a pillar of light just appeared out, in the middle of the street where he was. He had to be seeking that. And so you're right. In all of these documents that we're talking about, that is a key component to how these revelations came about. So I really appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, good. And kind of our last week's lesson was about, Joseph F. Smith receiving a vision of the celestial kingdom. And he talks about that. He talks about himself just pondering about these things. He doesn't have his scriptures open yet. And he goes on about, I was thinking about, Paul and Peter and these guys doing this stuff and all these other cities. And pretty soon this understanding started. And then he goes and opens the scriptures. Then he wasn't even studying at that point. And then he starts looking at this, and then he figures out this, and then he has this vision of the celestial kingdom, and it's interesting, yeah. That sometimes it is just that pondering, that deep pondering that we go through, that reveals all of these great, great things for the benefit of man. So I'm going to jump into the Articles of Faith now.
Can I say something real quick?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Section 138 is near and dear to me because it's when I was inactive and my mom was singing in the choir, but she happened to be the gospel doctrine teacher.
Yes.
Get them situated. And it happened to be that Sunday where we're studying section 138. And I remember thinking, I want to come back to church. I want to be able to feel like I have the courage and the strength to change the way I'm living to come back. And I remember when I went home and reread section 138, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't have the faith, the testimony of a prophet, but I do believe that if I study it, the Lord will answer my question, my petition. He will give me the direction that I need to go in to be strong enough to come back to the church. And so I did what he did. I opened up, I just dropped my quad and it opened up to First Corinthians and like halfway in the chapter
Mhm.
10. So actually so I went all the way back to First Corinthians and just started reading till I got to chapter 10, verse 13, and that's when is basically says there's no sin or no weakness that, or you could say trial that befalls man that he is not able to overcome. And I was like, there you have it. I was like, so if I believe that this is how we got a deeper revelation about the eternities and the afterlife, and it worked for a prophet, it should be able to work for me. And then that began my journey of coming back to the gospel. So section 138 is really special to me.
Yeah, I like that. So let me in the lesson, one of the uh, little extra links they have in there, it goes to a talk from L. Tom Perry, and he d discusses the articles of faith. Actually, he talks about a story of him and his Sunday school teacher or somebody that was trying to get them all to learn the articles of faith. But anyway, he divides these into four different or five different groups, and I thought it was interesting the way he analyzed that. He says 1 through 4 are talk about the Godhead and the basic doctrine of Christ. And it's true, we believe in God, the eternal Father, and His Son, Jesus Christ. We believe that men are punished for their own sins. We believe that through the atonement of Christ, all mankind may be saved. We believe the first principles and ordinances of the gospel. So he lays it out very nicely. It is. It's a nice little package of the basic things. And then the next two verses about organizing the organization and the order of the priesthood. And we believe a man must be called of God. And we believe that the same organization that existed in the primitive church exists now in our church. And then the next three verses about eternal resources in a mortal journey. And I was really kind of interested, or it kind of caught my attention because we believe in the gift of tongues and prophecy and revelations, visions, healings, interpretation of the tongues. We believe the Bible to be the Word of God, and we believe I love this number 9. Obviously, we believe all that God has revealed, all that He does now reveal, and we believe that He will yet reveal many great and important
Yes.
things pertaining to the kingdom of God. My gosh, what a great statement that is. And then he lumps the next three together about we believe in the literal gathering of Israel. He calls this one member missionary. We
Mhm.
believe in the gathering of Israel. We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God and let everybody do the same. And we believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates. So we'll let everybody know if we're going to come and preach to you, we're not going to try and upset your whole apple cart.
That's right.
We're going to honor those things that are there. And then finally, 13, which way back in my younger days as a young youth,
Just have it memorized.
it was one of our mutual themes that we believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous. And so that was the aspirational attitudes of the church. And I thought that it was uh, very good that a great observation, I'll say. So anyway, you guys, any thoughts on the Articles of Faith?
I do remember having to memorize number 13.
Yeah. Yeah. I always thought that sounded like chased by an elephant, that one part.
Well, it was what made it a little easier is because it kind of goes with the principles of being a Boy Scout.
Yes.
And so they kind of go together. So when you had one memorized, you pretty much had the other. But I
Yeah.
know them, but I don't know them. I just
Yeah.
try to abide by them. We'll go that far. But remembering and being aware that we believe in ongoing revelation.
And I mentioned this as before we even started. I said I think the awesome thing about this, a lot of people make statements or give information. Companies do this all the time where they make a
Right.
mission statement and then 2 years later they got to adjust it because something else happened. This has been this way for, I don't know how many hundreds of years that this faith
Exactly.
was given, and it's still exactly the same way. So I thought that was pretty awesome. How about
Yes.
you?
Go ahead. Oh, you're
Yeah,
about to segue.
I just
Yeah, I
think
was
it's
just gonna jump to Rachel this time.
yeah, I love, what you're saying, that it is kind of a mission statement. It's every basic principle of what we believe rolled up into, 13 different articles of faith. Like, in your old school scriptures, it fits on 2 pages.
Yeah,
It's just a very nice, easy, simple way to understand what we believe in as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Um, and it's good for non-members, but I also think it's so good for us to just, because we can get really, sometimes we can go way off on tangents, or we can get deep, we can deep dive, certainly these other, declarations that we're about to talk about. You can deep dive into things like that, and you can get way down a rabbit hole that maybe isn't good for you. Um, in that, but if you can come back to the articles of faith and come back to the essentials of the gospel, then you can stay tied to the Savior and stay tied to your beliefs.
yeah,
And so I really like the articles of faith because they help ground me.
yeah,
And that's what I was going to say. I was going to say that, especially with the ongoing revelation, I think in our church today, not the gospel, but in the church today, so many of us are tied, as a metaphor, we're tied to the great and spacious building.
Hmm.
And because we're tied to the great and spacious building, when there's a policy change or there's a new revelation, then we start questioning it because it doesn't align with the great and spacious building. And because it doesn't align with the great and spacious building, then you hear things like, well, we have a fallen prophet, or those men aren't really called of God, because if they're called of God, they would do this or they would do that, or they would say this or they would say that. But in reality, when you go back, as you were saying, Rachel, if you look at the articles of faith, and something that my stake president used to say, well, actually, he still says, so I'm not going to say he used to say because he still says it. He picked up from a training with Elder Christofferson is we want the gospel to fit in our lives. Instead, we as members, as leaders, but let's just say with members, because we're a member before we become a leader. Are you in your thinking and your behavior in your worship? Are you in alignment with the gospel? Are you in alignment with Christ? If you're going down rabbit holes because this, and this, because you're more aligned with the great and spacious building, then what do you need to do to bring you back to be in alignment with the gospel? And I think, as you said, if we ground ourselves with the articles of faith and we are willing to have self introspection, am I really aligned with the church? Or, as Elder Kimby Clark shared one year when he was at our stake, or do you come to church in your own spiritual welfare? Because you take and you get all the spiritual nourishment while you're at church, but when you go home, you don't share it with anyone. And then you come back and you take more for yourself, but you're not sharing it.
yeah. I like that. And one thing I forgot to do, I usually try to name off the topics of the lesson. There's four topics in this one. No, three. First one was the articles of faith contain foundational truths of the restored gospel. We just talked about that. The second one is the Church of Jesus Christ is guided by revelation, and I think this is what we see in these declarations that, and really the articles of faith. But the one of the others, and we'll just kind of lightly touch this, was one of the articles of faith that is part of this section here. Just we believe that God will yet reveal many great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God. So we understand that, and that's kind of our I wouldn't say claim to fame, but it's one of the great tenets of the church is that we're not done yet with all the things that the Lord has for us. And I wrote myself a note about that. It says official declarations 1 and 2 represent Heavenly Father's giving us further understanding and direction according to the changing world. And there was a lot of pressure on the church to work with both of these things to have these declarations. The first one here, and we'll go ahead and move into that declaration number 1. It says the work of God must move forward. And so declaration 1 is what? Does anybody want to give us a thumbnail of that?
Basically, Declaration 1 bans plural marriage
Right.
in the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't want to get into all the detail of this, but one of the things that has to be considered when this was done and presented to the church, this must have been an earthquake because there were so many families that were connected this way. Even the leaders of the church, some of the 12 apostles, and now we're saying, no, we can't do this anymore. And I'm going to read part of this. There were at the end of this declaration, there were some excerpts from President Woodruff's uh, talks, different addresses, and in one of them, he says, "The question is this: which is the wisest course for the Latter-day Saints to pursue? To continue to attempt to practice plural marriage with the laws of the nation against it?" and the opposition of 60 million of people, and at the cost of the confiscation and loss of all the temples, and the stopping of all the ordinances therein, both for the living and the dead, and the confiscation of personal property of the people, all of which, this is parentheses, all of which of themselves would stop the practice, close, or after doing and suffering what we have thought are adherents to this principle, and fathers to cease the practice and submit to the law, although doing so, leave the prophets, apostles, and fathers at home so that they can instruct the people and attend to the duties of the church, and also leave the temples in the hands of the saints so that we can attend to the ordinances of the gospel, both for the living and the dead. So these were some of the consequences that they had to look at. Either we can leave our leadership in place and not have the law trying to chase them around, or we can abide by this, what we hear, and accept what the Lord is saying. Go ahead and do this now. Let's end this practice. I've instituted from time to time for my needs. We are at that point now where we're under subjugation to, and the thing that I really had not really thought about that much, I don't know why, but the confiscation of the temples leading to no more celestial marriages, no more baptism for the dead, no more ordinances for salvation. It's like, wow, yeah, we can't risk that. We have to do something. So, how are you guys? Is there any other insight or other feelings you have about this Declaration 1?
I was speaking about this a few weeks ago, and I just made the comment. I was like, I wasn't being I was like, I promise I'm not being dismissive. I was like, but it's hard for me to talk about because I'm a guy.
Yeah.
I was like, and I was like, no disrespect to the women in the room, or in this case, the women who may be listening. But polygamy for me as a guy is I can only see as a benefit and not a hindrance because I get to have multiple wives. It's one of those things that as a guy, you're not thinking about what is the downstream implications for the women who are impacted. And you can read that in Saints. And one of the ladies in a dinner, like a book club, basically, it's probably the easiest way to describe it, a book club that I facilitate. She mentioned that the school that she used to teach at, all the children were of a polygamous family. There was 4 wives. and there was like total there was about 30 children, and the husband unexpectedly died, and the first wife was like, okay, he's dead, all of y'all are cut off, go fend for yourself. And then
Mm,
she just talked about how that impacted that family, or those the other three families. And I'm like, that's an interesting thing, because again, we don't think about that. We just think about, oh, as a guy. And I was like, honestly, it was hard enough dating when I was single, dating multiple people, just having seeing different people. I couldn't imagine having multiple wives that you had to go and visit. And I was like, and I can be honest and say it's kind of being selfish, because I'm looking at it from a guy's perspective and what I got to deal with. I was like, but that's why I was like, I don't really talk much about it, because I can only give a guy's perspective. I don't know what it's like for the sisters who had to live that life, who, when polygamy was revoked, who got left essentially on their own, stuck
Yeah.
out in the cold. So I would love a deeper conversation one day and I know people who are descendants of polygamy, but how it impacted their families, good, bad, indifferent. That would be just a really provocative conversation to see.
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I've thought a lot about, what would my feelings be like if I was in that situation? If I was living during this time, what would my feelings be? And I think, first of all, I would be like, are you serious? You just told us we had to do this. Like, I mean, you've been telling us all along that polygamy is good and we should do it, and now it's okay, no more. Don't do it anymore. And what happens, like, if you already are in this family? Are you getting divorced? Is your marriage dissolved? What, are you out in the cold like you were saying, Ramses? Like, I can imagine so many questions, and I think it would be hard to accept the end of plural marriage as after you've been told for so long that this is something we should do, and especially for those who maybe struggled to follow that law in the beginning and then ended up doing it, and now you're taking it away. I think I would have a hard time with that. I think that would be a real struggle. I think it's so easy for us now to look at it through our lens and our lives right now, and to look back at plural marriage through that lens of what our lives are. But I think that we have to be careful about doing that, because we didn't live in that time. We don't fully understand all the circumstances, and the reasonings that the Lord made, put that principle in place and then took it away. We don't get all of that. And so, for me, when I think about plural marriage, I look at the Bible. There's a lot of examples of that in the Bible. So I know that this has been instituted throughout different ages of time. Um, but honestly, I think I would have had a real challenge living like that. Um, and I certainly I don't have any negative feelings about people who lived it. I don't have any negative feelings about my Heavenly Father for instituting it and taking it away. Um, I think it's just, but I know that I would have struggled with it. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah. And there's some well, a number of challenges that in our day we don't even think about, because they had the laws were different then. So in a lot of cases, a single woman could not purchase land. She could
Right,
not own a home. So
right.
once this was happening, and if she had to move out of that home, then she couldn't have another place. She'd have to marry another man, and a lot of them, there were a number of them that did not want to marry somebody else. They felt like this was a good thing, and they wanted to stay married. I mean, there was, just like marriage today, there were separations and divorces in plural marriages, so they still had those challenges. But then those that had marriages that they both all of the parties wanted to stay intact, then they had to go and secretly visit
Right.
each other. They had to live in separate residences and
Right.
sometimes change their names to keep this hiding. You couldn't even call each other by your real name because then somebody would snitch on you, and
Right.
I'm sure there were bounties or rewards for turning in people who were still practicing polygamy. So there's just so many things that this disrupted. But just like always, I'm amazed the Saints went through so much garbage throughout all their history. Every time they tried to institute things or find a place of peace or try to become part of a community, they were ostracized and finally just driven out. Like, you see the desire for moving to Salt Lake and becoming their own people. And then even there, people came after them for all of these things. So, yeah, I can't imagine what the trauma was like when this was instituted. But once again, people, had to suck it up and say, what am I going to do? Do I believe? And am I going to go ahead and continue um, following the prophet, following the leaders, or am I going to say this is just too much? I give up here. I'm gonna just sit down and not do anything else. So yeah, quite a challenge. Quite a challenge. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. So the last section here talks about I can trust the Lord even when I do not have a perfect understanding. And so we get to this declaration number 2, and it's interesting that it's really not that long of a a statement. It's pretty quick, and I can I can kind of remember when this happened. I don't remember exactly. Some people say, "Oh, I remember the day and time," and I was what I was thinking, where I was at when this all happened. And honestly, I don't. I was probably in my workday somewhere because I was home from my mission and married and going about my business. But it's really interesting how this played out and all of the feelings about this. So I'm going to go ahead and say something here, and one of the things that I think, and just like declaration number 1, this is a refining moment. People are going to have their opinions, and like I said, some fall away, some stay totally engaged. Some people don't know what to think, and regardless of that, this statement, people are still going to have their own opinions, prejudices. They're still going to go where they were always headed to if that's how they felt. And so to me, this was a great challenge for a lot of people to say, how does this make you feel? What do you think about this? Is the prophet still a prophet? All these things that challenge people. So again, we'll just go out to you guys. What do you think? We'll give you some time to Ramses. I know you have some thoughts on this, so go ahead.
I do. It's everything you said is, I hope it's thought provoking for people, because one of the things that is true is, and I'm going to go forward and then I'm going to come back. So I'm the Elders Quorum president, and one of my things was I was inactive. We have to be good member missionaries. We've got to go out and we've got to do our own teaching. Even if they don't want to see us, we've got to do these things. So there's this one brother that we finally got to come back to church. He hadn't been to church in 25 years. And so I'm up there, I'm conducting. I didn't have a teacher that day, so I'm teaching. And this is in 2013 when the first Race and Priesthood comes out. So I wanted to make sure that the brothers in my quorum read it, because it was important. I'm in Texas, we're in the South. Yeah. We've got people. One of the things that spurred me to petition my stake president about the Genesis group was I'm watching missionaries baptize black people. They join the church, and within 6 months, they go inactive and don't want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So I'm in elders quorum. We're teaching it, and then this brother that we'd been trying to get to come back to church.
Wait,
Wait,
can I interrupt for quick second?
yeah,
Can you give those who may not be familiar with the Genesis group kind of an overall or a quick thumbnail of what that is?
yes.
Yes.
So the Genesis Group was founded in 1971 with Darius Gray, Ruffin Bridgeforth, and Eugene Orr, under the direction of the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12. The three junior apostles that worked with them were President Monson, then Elder Monson, Elder Hinckley, Elder Packer. And together they formed the Genesis Group. And what the Genesis Group is then and now is meant to be a support group for Black members of the church, to give them somewhere they can feel, for lack of a better phrase, whole. They can feel that they belong. I mean, and I say that way on purpose because one of the things that I stopped saying was, oh, you converted to the gospel. Well, technically, you didn't. If you were an atheist, maybe you converted to the gospel. But if you were of another religion, I don't feel like you converted. I feel like you transition because I didn't go on a mission, but I'm sure, Chuck, when you were in your mission, you said that the gospel is the fullness of the gospel. And so where your religion may have aspects of the truth, we have it all in one place. And so for me, people are not converting to the church, they're transitioning to the gospel because they're looking for that fullness. They want the full pie instead of just a sliver. So, and if you need more information, you can go on Facebook and go to the Genesis Group Facebook page and you can get more information about the Genesis Group. I just given high level information. So this brother, back to the story, he storms out and I send my second counselor to go find out what's going on. So after church is over, he comes to me and he's all shaken. And I'm like, what's going on? Why do you leave? And he's like, I don't want to tell you because I don't want you to be upset. I'm like, did he go smack my mom? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, no. I'm like, well, I mean, did he hit my wife? I'm trying to come up with things that I would be upset
Did
about.
you crash into my car in the parking
Right.
lot?
And so he's like, no. I was like, then what's up? He said, I don't like it that Black men got the priesthood. And I'm angry that now we have a Black elders quorum president. That's why I stopped coming to church and I'm not coming back to this church ever again. And he looks at me and goes, I just didn't want to tell you that. I'm like, well, why? I'm like, am I supposed to be upset about that? I was like, I've had people call me worse than that. I was like, I think I'm going to be okay. I was like, here's the thing. And I told him this, and I say this to everyone. Here's the thing that we keep forgetting, especially like with this, is there's that phrase called free agency. And he has free agency to exercise however he wants to. One of the things that I've become to accept with this is the natural man. There was a time that I dealt with some racism a few years ago, and I was crushed because it was someone that I knew that I grew up with, and I didn't know that they felt that way. And my mom said this to me. She goes, everybody comes to this earth to work on something. And I was taking her to the airport. I'm respectful. I didn't yell at my mom. I didn't cuss her out. I was just like, That's all I said. That was me saying that I disagree. Love my mom. Gave her and my dad a hug. They left. And I'm driving back home. And the spirit was like, she's right. And I'm like, I'm not talking to you right now. Because I don't want to hear it. I want to be upset. But it hit me and I was like, but you're right. I was like, she's right. And it humbled me because I'm like, we all do come here to work on something. Maybe it's in the pre-existence, you had unpleasant feelings about someone of another ethnicity, or you had a propensity to alcohol or to porn or whatever it is. But you couldn't be perfected because you didn't have a body to be able to work through the problems of the natural man. So now let's move back to what I mentioned before about my revelation. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. I get called to be Elders Quorum president. And this is before the church puts out Race in the Priesthood in 2013. So I get called in 2011, and the whole year, the Spirit is like, from about 6 months in till the summer of 2012, the Spirit's like, you need to talk to your quorum about race in the priesthood. You need to educate them about what this is and what happened, and to dispel myths. The myth of, first, that Black men were not able to hold the priesthood until 1978 and then go to the temple. You need to dispel that myth and go. And the Spirit was like, you need to do this. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I was like, I'm the Elders Quorum president, and then you're going to make me go up there and look like I'm trying to use my position to talk about being Black. Essentially, it's kind of how. So I'm arguing with the Spirit, and I tell people, I'm being honest. I'm like, I argue with the Spirit because I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I don't feel comfortable. I don't think that's my responsibility. And the Spirit's like, haha, tricks on you, because it is, because you're the Elders Quorum president. And so over the next year, stuff starts to happen. Things are starting to come up. We're having issues in the ward with Black members who get baptized, who fall inactive because they find out that Blacks couldn't hold the priesthood. And now they feel like the church is racist. And why didn't people tell them this? So I'm going through all this, and obviously the Spirit wins, because the Spirit always wins. I'm just lucky I didn't get eaten by a whale like Jonah. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. So over the next 6 months, so January to June, July, I work on a lesson. First, it's going to be some talking points about Blacks in the priesthood and how it all unfolded, some of the common myths that were shared and matriculated through the culture of the church, not the gospel itself. And it ended up being like 7 pages. And it was titled Blacks in the Priesthood, A Missionary Experience. And it takes this ugly, messy, hard conversation and uses the scriptures to lay out where we as men erred. For me, when I had that personal revelation, to call Brigham Young and to say that he's racist, where you could say that, it doesn't do justice. And I don't, when I say that, meaning like, no, he needs to be called worse. No, just the opposite. King Benjamin taught that we all have the natural man in us, and that the natural man is the enemy of God and will ever, forever and forever and ever, so forth, so on. The only reason why the natural man isn't an enemy is if we cling hold to the rod and to the gospel. And when we get inklings and promptings from the Spirit that, Ramses, you're going the wrong way, you need to turn. Or like when Nephi look, and you look, oh, there's a car coming, I need to stop. Or whatever it is. For me, and I share this with people, Brigham Young was faced with a challenge. He had personal bias that in a heated moment, he allowed the natural man to take over. Does that mean that he wasn't a prophet of God? No. What it means is that he was human, and to be human is to be fallible. And for me to almost 200 years ago, look back and say that he was an evil man for what he did is inappropriate. The reality is the gospel teaches us that we need to have grace and we need to forgive. 70 times 70. And when you get to 491 and you still don't feel better, just keep forgiving until you decide you feel better, because that's what the Lord expects. And I do believe, and Paul Reeve and I have talked about this, I do believe that being on the other side, being able to see what his words And as I've learned more about Brigham, his stubbornness, and this is what I said, this is what I mean, and I'm going to stand by it. I don't care if I'm wrong. This is what I'm going to do. He's been able to see over the years the error.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that he's had to repent and go through the purification of the mistakes that he made. And if we, as members of the church, are not willing to see that and accept that into our lives, then we ourselves have repenting to do. And one of the things I talk about is you can take Brigham and isolate him in a moment, but then what about the prophets after him who upheld what he said? To me, they're at more fault than Brigham, but I still hold grace for them because they're still men. They're still fallible. And something that a friend of mine taught me a few weeks ago, he was like, what's the one thing on this planet that keeps people divided? And I was like, racism. He's like, yeah, think about it. How many wars have been fought in our history because we didn't look the same, we didn't believe the same thing, we didn't eat the same thing? I'm right, you wrong. He's like, the greatest tool that Satan has employed is devising racism to keep us separate, because if we're separate, we're not together. And a friend of mine who's a junior pastor at home sent me this reel, and there was this guy talking about Christians have heaven all wrong. And he said, we think heaven is somewhere we're trying to get, and we're on earth trying to get to heaven. But in reality, if we are real Christians and we take Christ upon us and put Christ in our heart, then heaven would be on earth. This would be heavenly earth. And so I'm like, okay, makes sense to me. That's pretty logical. And my friend Patrick, sorry, make sure you edit that out. He says to me, I don't, that doesn't like, I'm not sure. Like, it doesn't seem off. And I was like, but think about it. For 365 years, Enoch's people lived in peace. Didn't mean that there wasn't death, doesn't mean there wasn't rich people or poor people, but they were in harmony with Christ, with the gospel, with one another, so much that the Lord loved them so much he just translated them to heaven. Like, come on, y'all good. Y'all proved it. Let's go. And I was like, just think about that. If everyone took Christ upon them and lived as Christ did, you wouldn't have wars, you wouldn't have racism, you wouldn't have people trying to cheat each other. What you would have is, yes, I have more money than you, but I see that what you need, and I'm going to help you so that you can live a better life. To me, going back to Article of Faith number 9, it is imperative that we remember that we believe in constant revelation. Because as President Nelson, I won't say pounded, because that's not his personality, but as he kept saying, we have to root out racism, but we have to root it out within us first. And I think so many of our congregations, they all look the same, they all feel the same, so they don't see, oh, he's talking to me, he's talking to them over there, because they're so busy looking at the beam in my eye that they don't see the mote in their own eye.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Very
Yeah,
good.
thank you. It kind of makes me think, so, Black Lives Bless and Gathering of Tribes recently sponsored a Deseret book event for the Expressions of Jesus book. And, there were artists, some of the artists whose work was in the book were there to answer questions and things like that. And I think that books like that, experiences like that, help us increase our understanding of all of God's children, and I think it's so important. You mentioned that, sometimes our congregations all look the same and act the same and think the same. And I think it's sometimes difficult to be different. It can be a little scary. Something that I felt prompted to do is to wear my turquoise jewelry, wear my indigenous jewelry to church on Sundays. And I've felt like it's important for me to be a beacon to those other indigenous saints who maybe don't feel like they have somebody else they can relate to. But sometimes it makes me feel like I am, like I'm standing out, and I don't want to do that, It makes
Right.
it's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes
Yes.
because I don't wear the same jewelry that all these cute other ladies are wearing, and don't get me wrong, I love my jewelry. I do, but I don't look the same, I look different. I stand out in a way that's not comfortable for me. I don't like to stand out. You know, I want to kind of just blend in and, but the Spirit has told me not to. The Spirit has told me that I need to be somebody that makes those other people feel comfortable, those that maybe don't, feel like they fit in, and to help them to feel like it's okay to stand out. Um, with this official declaration too, one of the things that I remember is several years ago when we were having the same lesson, one of the older ladies in our ward talked about how at the time before this declaration came out, that their ward and their stake fasted and prayed that this would happen. That it was something that they were asked to do, and she remembers fervently praying for this to come about because it was important. And I love that as much as there is negativity and racism in the world, there were people who were rejoicing with their Black brothers and sisters that they had this opportunity now, that this was restored to them. And so I'm grateful for people who are allies of those who are maybe on the, those that are marginalized or on the fringes. And I'm so grateful that there were people like that too,
Right.
who wanted that, who maybe it didn't affect them in such a personal way, but it affected them because we're all brothers and sisters in the gospel.
Yeah,
Amen.
yeah. One of the most powerful emotional settings or experiences I had while I was serving a mission um, was this. I don't know. I don't know how to call it empathy or um, I didn't want to feel sorry for this brother, but I realized his desire was so sincere and so way back in the day when I left on my mission, the mission home was an old schoolhouse right there near Temple Square, and we would go um, to the Hotel Utah, which is now the Joseph Smith I don't know. Anyway, so we
Christmas
go there.
building, yeah.
Yeah, and so we go in the bottom of that place, and they'd serve us all of our meals there. And every now and then, somebody would wander in. There'd be sometimes a general authority, sometimes a state president. But this one afternoon, this black gentleman walked in there. This is in 1972, by the way. And so he walks in there and he starts talking to us and is encouraging us as missionaries. And then he said, "You brethren have the opportunity that I don't have. I cannot do what you are going to go out to do." He says, "I wish I could. I wish I had that blessing, but I don't. But I know someday that's will happen, that the Lord will make it happen. So please do your best. He says, I wish I could be there with you, but I can't. And that struck me, but he was still a strong member of the church, even though he did not have this. I've read some of these ancillary stories in this lesson. I can't remember the sister's name now. She was one of the, let me see, I think I have it here. Elizabeth,
Manning
Jane
James.
Elizabeth, yeah, Manning James. How she wanted these blessings. I mean, she was so close to the church and so close to the prophet Joseph and their family and stuff. And then as she was in Salt Lake and she implored several of the general authorities and stuff to
Mhm.
at least have the opportunity to have her temple work done, because of this, she was denied. But it didn't dampen her spirit. It did not push her away from the church. It did not anger her. She was saddened, but she was still faithful in the church. And for me, thinking about that, I think that there was something we talked about one time in our elders quorum, and somebody asked about what keeps you in the church. What they asked everybody, what is there something that you have learned or that kind of makes you feel like you are not ever gonna walk away from this? And I said, for me, it's actually kind of a heritage thing because in the Book of Mormon, it talks about the Lamanites who were converted. And it says,
Yeah.
and they never did fall
Mhm.
away from the church.
Right.
And I said, that's who I want to be. I want to be just like those people who, regardless of what happened, regardless of the situation, no matter what. In fact, I even had one of my companions on my mission tell me that he hated Indians and he did not want to be serving among the Lamanites. And I said, Elder, you're in the wrong place because you got a
You're wrong place,
Lamanite
buddy.
companion and
That's
it was
right.
right here in the Crow Reservation. So, but it didn't deter me at all. I just felt that, and like you said, that's your opinion. That's your problem. It's not mine. You're not hurting me by that. You're hurting yourself. You know, and so this whole idea in this situation of the feelings and I guess apprehensions of man, prejudices, if you want to call it that. I don't want to judge anybody, but many people have feelings like this.
Yes.
And it's for those people to work on those things. That's why they were sent here, just like your mom said. Got to work some things out.
Yeah.
I what did you say? You did after your mom said that. You made a little
I'll sit.
that's I love because I have a lot of black friends and they use that little exclamation lots of times like
Yes.
you don't
Yes.
know what you're talking about. You're crazy.
That's right.
Exactly. I know what that means with just one
Yes.
little sound.
Hmm.
But so that this whole thing, I hope because of all the things that we get thrown in our face, I guess, as why we're not a Christian church, are these two things: polygamy and the priesthood being withheld from blacks. And it's something that we all need to uh, find out for ourselves. And I don't know, maybe this is the wrong thing to say, but find out all that stuff. And you were talking about Brigham Young in some of the comments. My gosh, there were some horrible things said
Yes.
between him and who was it?
Orson
Oh,
Pratt.
yeah, Orson Pratt. My gosh, they almost went to blows, I think, with this
Yes.
whole thing. But still, it's that's not my problem. And I'm not saying this to push it off on a racial tone. I'm just saying whatever things there were between leaders of the church, that's for them to work out with the Lord. All I'm worried about is, did Joseph Smith see the Father and the Son? And if that's true, that I can
Anything
get
else is
past
true. Right.
anything else. And so I'm so happy that you kind of helped us see some of these things and being a person of color also. I've seen some of it in my life, and but to me, it's just the thinking of men. It's not God's plan.
And I like what you said when you said other religions use polygamy and the priesthood restriction as to say that we're not Christian. And I will, on your podcast, admit I like to argue. Try to be good, but I do like to argue. I don't argue about. I only want to argue when I'm right, so that I'm not wrong. But when it comes to the church, I do feel like it's my responsibility to defend the church. And so, one of the things that I often, especially when I'm talking with Black people, and I'll say this not necessarily to judge, but the perception of someone, a white person who's being self-righteous, I will say to them, you do realize why there's Baptists and Southern Baptists. And they're like, because one's in the North and one's in the South. I was like, no, because in the 1600s, the Northern Baptists were abolitionists and wanted to eradicate slavery.
Yeah.
Southern Baptists was like, no, that's my bread and butter. Mm-hmm. So you have a schism in the Baptists, and that's why you have Baptists and Southern Baptists. I was like, that's why you had a Black Bible that only talked about in the Bible, only talked about how Black people were supposed to be subjugated to white people into their masters. Why do you have the AME church, or you have Black churches in general? Because white churches would not allow us to worship with them. Or if they did have an integrated congregation, white members were down low and Black members were up in the rafters, so that we could not ever be in close proximity to each other. And I talk about that. I'm like, so don't try to come at me with all this high and mighty, because all religions that are on this earth, whether they're Christian, they're Jewish, they're Muslim, Buddhist, whoever, all have some element of racism within them. Mm-hmm. I'm like, and I was like, oh, if you want to, let's take it out of the United States. I was like, do you know why you have Pakistan and you have India? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, because Pakistan didn't want to be Hindu. They wanted to be Muslim. And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, I like to read. Maybe you should go read and you'll find out for yourself. But I'm like, all of these little bitty things that happen around the world have some element of racism built into them. Mm-hmm. And then if you strip that away, then you have to deal with that we're all the same. And if we're all the same, because when I get cut, I bleed red just like you do, then what are we talking about? And I think sometimes we get caught up in that. I mean, I still have conversations with people who believe that the priesthood ban was of God. And I'm like, but in the scriptures, whether you look at the New Testament, Doctrine and Covenants, or the Book of Mormon, it says repeatedly that the Lord is no respecter of persons. I can quote 5 scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants where the Lord told them to go and take the gospel to everyone. There was no, when Chuck was reading earlier, he was like, I'm going to read what's in the parentheses. There was no in parentheses, don't take it to Black people or anyone of African descent, i.e. because of the curse of Cain or the curse of Ham, because that was something that Protestant ministers came up with to justify slavery. Though members of the church unknowingly still use that, or say that we were fence setters or that we weren't valiant in the pre-existence. And I remember, and I remind them, when it says there was a war in heaven, does it say with an asterisk, well, Black people, they weren't valiant like everybody else? And they were like, well, no. I was like, you know why? Because in heaven, he didn't say black and white, orange and blue. He just said, either you're following the Savior or you're not. And if you didn't follow the Savior, guess what? You didn't get a body. So obviously, I was somebody's valiant because I got a body.
Yeah.
You cannot think I was super valiant, but I got a body. So it means I did my part. And I use the scriptures to poke holes in those, because I'm asking you just to think about it logically. Take the emotion, strip the emotion away, strip what you learned from your parents or your grandparents. Go and read the scriptures and think, did it say specifically? And I think we even in 2 Nephi 26:33, we use presentism when it says bond or free, black or white. And we discuss it, and I remind people, you know why he says bond and free? Was it because they had slaves? I was like, when they asked Zoram to come be with them, they weren't asking Zoram to come be with them because it was cool and he seemed like a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Zoram was a slave.
Yeah.
And they know that Zoram was going to go back and tell the leaders that that they killed Laban and they went into the wilderness and they were going to get hunted. And that's why Nephi specifically says, if you come with us, you will be free.
Yeah.
We don't think about that when they say that the Lamanites had dark skin. I was reading earlier this year and I had an aha moment and I was upset because I'm like, I've read this verse in Alma many times, but it talks about, I think it's Alma 2 or chapter 4, but it talks about how when the Amlicites go and join the Lamanites, and it talks about how you could tell the Amlicites and the Lamanites from the Nephites. And it says you could tell the Lamanites from the Nephites because they didn't wear armor. They wore a loincloth and they had a red mark on their forehead. And the Amlicites had armor, but they had the red mark on their forehead. I was like, okay, hold on. If the Nephites are white and the Lamanites are black, then why do I need to put a red mark on my forehead so that you know that I'm the enemy? Because you should be able to see me and be like, oh, he's black. He's on the wrong team. That's who I want to kill. I'm like, and I say it like that. And I was talking to some people. I was like, and I say it like this because when you read it, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like, duh. But we get so caught up in using presentism to read what someone was writing in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Realizing they all look the same.
Yeah.
They were all the same. Now, did they get darker over time? Probably, because they were in the middle of the cut of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you lived on the equator every day, Rachel, they'd probably be like, Rachel is a red bone. She's got straight hair, but she's light skinned.
Well, even when I was a kid, I was much, much darker because I spent much more time in the sun. So
yeah. You know, but when I have conversations with people, I'm not doing it to be ugly or to make them feel dumb, but I want them to examine, what is it that you believe? I'm working in a new training, and one of the questions I have in there is, what is it that you believe? Because you're right, Chuck. I've heard people say, oh, the black saints that just stayed in the church, they stayed because they're obedient. I'm like, no, they didn't. They stayed because, like what you said, they heard the gospel. They had a spiritual gift to hear the gospel, know the gospel is true, and was not willing to go against it, like the anti-Nephi, anti-Lehi. Yeah, the anti-Nephi
Lehi.
I had to get them all in there. Because they were like, they knew the gospel was true and they would do anything to hold to their covenants. And those pioneer blacks who were in not primitive, the early church, knew the gospel was true. And they would rather die without being able to receive temporal covenants than to turn their back and go a different way because they knew that the gospel was true. Their
Amen.
testimony was, one day I'm going to be able to get my temple covenants. I'll just have to wait. And that is something that we today, across the board, we need to look at and think, is my testimony of the gospel that strong? That when back to receiving revelation that doesn't conjoin with what we believe because we're closer to the big and spacious building than we are to the path and the tree of life. What do I believe? And do I believe, and is my testimony strong enough to keep me rooted so that when the storm comes, I don't get uprooted and I find myself somewhere else?
I like it.
Yep.
Go team.
Well, Ramses, I think this takes us to our final question.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is, why are you thankful for the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ?
I'm thankful for the gospel, and I'll dip back in when I was inactive. I dated people who were like, "You should come to church with me." And I'm like, "Sure, I'll go to your church." Well, if you come to my church and you like it, will you join it? No. And they'd be like, "Why?" I'm like, "Because your church isn't true." They're like, "What?" I was like, the church I grew up in, I know unequivocally that it's true. There's nothing that could ever happen to me that could ever take away my testimony. I was like, right now, I don't necessarily live the gospel, because one of the things that's different about my religion than most religions is we have accountability. And if you're not living the gospel, you could be held accountable for it. I was like, I'm not living the gospel, so I need to get my life in order. I was like, so I'm not going to join your church. But I've had some very tender moments in my life, some very spiritual moments that told me, have affirmed to me over and over again that the gospel is true. And I will not turn my back on the gospel, because I know that it's true. And because I know it's true, I've accepted that in my patriarchal blessing, it says that if you open your mouth and share your testimony, that people will believe. So, and that you need to educate yourself so that when you speak, you can speak with authority. So I'm trying to do what my patriarchal blessing says and do my part. So I just work here doing the Lord's work however I can.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are so happy that you joined us today, and we really appreciate the work of Black Lives Bless and the Genesis Group and all of the organizations like that, is even Gathering of Tribes, who specifically help certain groups within the church to feel comfortable, to understand their purpose. And I'm so grateful that there are groups like that, and that there are people who are willing to take on that work, because it's so important. So thank you for all that you do for the saints that you are able to reach out to. We invite everyone to join us again next week by watching on the Gathering of Tribes YouTube channel, or by listening on your favorite audio podcast platform. To learn more about the mission of Gathering of Tribes and upcoming events, you can visit our website at www.gatheringoftribes.org. If you like this podcast, we would love for you to take a moment and write a review. Positive reviews not only uplift us, but they also help others find our podcast. Thank you for joining us. May your path be peaceful and enlightening this week.